Well, thank you very much for the COPD 2021 for allowing me to go ahead and participate. The EVALI vaping associated lung injury is now an epidemic that is present. I would like to go ahead and talk about the following things: e-cigarettes, diacetyl, bronchiolis obliterans, vaping, juuling, and this is why this is problematic because of nicotine. Cigarettes and e-cigarettes help people cope with stress from daily life. When used, it calms people's anxiety, helps them relax, and comforts them when they're sad. But a fact is that the chemicals in cigarettes and e-cigarettes actually cause the bodies in a state of physical stress by sending toxins into our body. E-cigarettes has a risk of bronchiolitis obliterans associated with flavoring chemicals. The risk of e-cigarettes or vaping associated with lung injuries is also present. There are harmful products in cigarettes and e-cigarettes that affect our blood pressure, pulse rate, and other organs and immune systems. To date, science has identified more than 7,000 chemicals, including 250 poisonous and 70 carcinogenic compounds in commercial produced cigarette smoke, as well as e-cigarettes. Some of these harmful products are benzene, cadmium, isoprene, lead, nickel, formaldehyde, acetaldehyde, toluene, and nitrosamine, as well as nicotine itself. Benzene, the first, is found in pesticides and gasoline, also in air from emissions. And acute short-term inhalation may cause drowsiness, dizziness, headaches, eye, skin, and respiratory tract irritation. At high levels, it can go ahead and become unconscious, and with chronic long-term inhalation exposure has caused various disorder in reducing the number of red blood cells and aplastic anemia. Reproductive effects have been reported for women exposed by inhalation to benzene. The EPA, United States Environmental Protection Agency, has said that benzene is a known carcinogenic for all routes of exposure. Cadmium. Smokers have twice as much cadmium in their bodies as non-smokers. Cadmium in a single cigarette, when burned, has a level of 1,000 to 3,000 ppb. Exposure to cadmium can produce nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, muscle cramps, liver injury, and shock. Long-term exposure may cause lung, kidney, bone, or blood damage. The acute short effects of cadmium in humans through inhalation exposure consists of many effects on the lung, such as pulmonary irritation. Propylene glycol. Propylene glycol is the main ingredient of e-liquids. Inhaling propylene glycol may affect airways, short exposure, and air causing irritations in the eyes, throat, and other airways. Long-term exposure may raise children's risk of developing asthma, and this is important for us to remember that these children can go ahead and have asthma caused by long-term exposure by the parent. Lead. There are lead organic found in plants, water, and inorganic lead such as lead oxide and lead chloride. Studies link exposure to lead can be a contributor to lung cancer, which is important for us to remember too. Nickel accumulates in the tobacco plant, and the concentration increases dramatically through the manufacturing process. While only a small amount of nickel from the cigarette is taken into the body, the most common effect is from nickel's effects in respiratory problems. There have been reported inhalation exposure to nickel. Studies of soluble nickel compounds, nickel carbonyl, have been reported as seen in lung tumors. Formaldehyde. E-cigarettes vapor contains formaldehyde. Breathing secondhand smoke can allow one to expect to found that you will go ahead and have formaldehyde. This causes throat and eye irritation, burning sensation of the nose, throat, coughing, wheezing, nausea, and skin irritation. The long-term effects are nasal cancer and a significant factor for myeloid leukemia. Acetaldehyde formaldehyde is a poisonous solvent, and we find it in paint stripper. Exposure to this results in irritation to the eyes, skin, and respiratory tract. The symptoms of intoxication resemble that of alcoholism. It is considered a human carcinogen, and it's based on inadequate human cancer studies, but we're going to go ahead and see that the FDA doesn't go ahead and regulate any of these problems. Toluene is a primary organ for toluene toxicity, and it remembers that you get developmental effects such as CNS dysfunction, attention deficits, minor craniofacial and limb anomalies are seen in the children of parents who are women exposed to high levels of inhalation. This becomes another problem that we have to think about. It's a known substance that will cause cancer. Now, nicotine has been an insecticide since the 17th century. After World War II, its use has declined due to the availability of cheaper, more potent pesticides that are less harmful to mammals. Again, it must be remembered that this has been around since the 17th century. Nicotine poisoning is one of the most toxic of all poisons that has a rapid onset apart from local actions that target organ and peripheral and nervous systems. In severe poisoning, there are tremors, protestation, cyanosis, dyspnea, convulsion, progression to collapse, and coma. Even death may occur from paralysis of respiratory muscles and central respiratory failure. LD poisoning potential of adults is around 30 to 60 milligrams. In children, it's about 10 milligrams. So again, this goes to show you that the poisoning potential is very, very high, but very, very small in children. If e-cigarettes were pure nicotine, there are significant health risks, including increased risk of cardiovascular, respiratory, gastrointestinal disorders, decreased immune responsive and reproductive health problems, affects cell proliferation, oxidative stress, apoptosis, or the death of cells, and all may lead to cancer. Affects the tumor proliferation and metastases and cause resistance to chemical and radiologic therapeutic agents. Chronic nicotine exposure may lead to insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. These are all things that can happen when we talk about the problems with nicotine health risks. Symptoms of nicotine poisoning are eye exposure, irritation, abrasion, pain, redness, blurred vision, agitation, drowsiness, dizziness, headache, excessive salivation, high blood pressure, increased heart rate, lack of coordination, twitching, tremors, and abdominal pain, nausea, and vomiting. Again, these are problems that can happen with people who smoke cigarettes. And now it's probably present in e-cigarettes. Again, the FDA, Federal Drug Administration in the United States, has not identified any of these things, which they're supposed to identify by September 2021, which we are present in this particular month. Nicotine altered pathways arouses the brain to a state of increased alertness, increased heart rate and blood pressure, which we talked about, at high levels, relaxes muscles and releases of endorphins. But the problem is it reduces circulation to extremities and suppresses appetite for carbohydrates. Remember that when people stop smoking, one of the biggest problems that they have is they find that they will go ahead and eat more, and this is what the problem becomes. So again, is cigarette smoking and e-cigarettes good? Well, only if you want to lose weight and think about the fact that maybe you're going to go ahead and have all these other problems at the same time. The nicotine in e-liquid have candy and fruit flavoring and packaging that makes them attractive to children. Causes of nicotine poisoning from e-liquid have skyrocketed, with accidental incidence of liquid by kids rising 1,500% in the past 3 years. Most ER visits involving e-cigarettes liquid poisoning come from accidental ingestion of its liquid. From about 1/6 of these are related to someone inhaling these items. Nicotine pathways prime the brain's reward system, putting vapors at risk for addiction to other drugs. Nicotine acts via major mechanisms that are produced, for example, ganglionic transmission, nicotine acetylcholine receptors, or chromatin cell catalyst, central nervous system stimulation. These are all things that we talked about before. That the most important thing is the fact that it's now being used by children, increasing this amount, and this is what becomes a problem now with e-cigarettes. What does e-cigarettes have that causes carcinogenic of organ systems? Well, it's been proven that in animals, and you can see here, that it produces gastrointestinal and lung cancer. In humans, Nakata et al. In 2012 said that a tumor promoter in lung cancer. Let's go down to animals again, and you see that get pancreatic cancer, breast cancer, and lung cancer. And we know that people that smoke have these problems with COPD. It's not a not known thing, but yet e-cigarettes have not been ruled out with the FDA. Here is the example of transformation, which shows that cigarette smoke can go ahead and cause proliferation, metastases, inflammation, and proliferation resistance to apoptosis. What do nicotine have effect on the hemopathetic system? The hemostatic system increases production of hemoglobin, red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, fibrogen, hematocrit, and blood viscosity. these are problems that we have to think about, especially the hematocrit and blood viscosity. How about the respiratory system? Increases mucus secretion, cilia inactivation, laryngeal and bronchial reactivity, small airway narrowing. Cilia are destroyed by ciliatoxins and impaired tracheobronchial clearance. Again, we notice that people that smoke do have this problem, and a lot of them have a problem that they cannot speak as well. Effect on the body. Chronic smokers exhibit a decreased tolerance to pain and require more analgesics for pain management. This is very important when we go ahead as doctors and go ahead and give analgesics to patients that are smokers or e-smokers. Fentanyl and pentoxicylline are metabolized quicker in smokers, and as a result they need more to go ahead and have the same effect as you and I who do not smoke. The cardiovascular system, which increases systolic and diastolic blood pressure, increases the heart rate, peripheral vascular resistance, myocardial contractility, oxygen consumption and demand, and decreases coronary blood flow, oxygen supply, demand ratio. These are very important things to see when we have somebody that is a smoker, as well as now going ahead and finding out that it's also seen in e-cigarettes. E-liquids risk contains a chemical compound called diacetyl, which is associated with lung disease, and it's called bronchiolitis obliterans, that causes permanent damage to the bronchioles. Propylene glycerol and glycerol, the major components of e-liquids thought to be dangerous on their own, however they compose and decompose heated by the vaporized. So what happens with this is that as these people go ahead and the newer vaporizers that allow for higher wattages allow them to go ahead and get more and more toxic compounds in their bodies. The risk of bronchiolitis obliterans, particularly associated with flavoring chemicals, and the risk of e-cigarettes or vaping associated lung injuries is seen with e-cigarettes particularly. What is it? It is an inflammatory obstruction of the lungs, tiniest airways, the bronchioles becoming damaged, inflamed by chemical particles, or respiratory inflammation, particularly after organ transplants, leading extensive scarring that blocks the airways. This becomes a problem when we have a patient that is going to go ahead and have this as a disease, because what will happen is the only way that it can go ahead and be cured is to go ahead and have a lung transplant, which will be seen very shortly. It's a result of reactive oxidative species that can cause epithelial damage. It disrupts transepithelial sodium transporters, and the ensuing pulmonary obstruction is what happens. Produced by respiratory infection or flavoring compounds such as diacetyl and pentanedione. Now, I want everybody to look at diacetyl because that becomes the biggest problem that we're going to see in the flavoring. The butter flavoring is where we see this, and this is a link between what we see in the lungs and what we see with e-cigarettes, but it hasn't been reported yet as being a problem. So what do we have? We have associated risks in patients receiving general anesthesia, hypoxemia, desaturation, decreased SO2 venous saturation. Why are these important? Well, because in spirometry, chest radiograph, and lung biopsies, all these are seen and become a problem with, it's also known as popcorn lung disease. What is diacetyl? It's a naturally occurring organic compound found in butter, using as a flavoring agent electronic cigarettes. Now we just saw how bad we can go ahead and get popcorn lung disease. So it's a volatile chemical in nature, ingested as a solid or liquid, inhaled as a vapor if heated. Here we go ahead and realize that we go ahead and take the patient who is now going ahead and smoking e-cigarettes, having a problem, that they can go ahead and get the diacetyl problem with this butter flavoring that they have. It's associated with radical lung toxicity, and it's also been implicated for a broad spectrum of other disease processes. It is a dicarbonyl moiety, is popular and interacts with cellular nucleophiles and other carbonyl groups. Participates in hydrogen bonding, delocalizes electrons, and interacts with arginine residues on proteins. Now, what does this mean? Well, it means that this goes ahead and causes airway and toxicity, and is related to the butter flavoring that is very, very popular with e-cigarettes. It gives you epithelial necrosis, airway fibrosis, as seen in bronchiolitis obliterans. It's seen that gives you impaired mucociliary clearance and airway obstruction. Why is this important? This is important because what happens is these people don't realize that as they keep smoking, what will happen is that they can get this BO. Why is it important? It's found in vapors released in flavoring manufacturing plants. What happens with the first seen with popcorn lung was seen in popcorn factories many, many years ago. It has an increasing use for sweetening, flavoring in e-cigarettes, association with concern for safety, especially in today's population. Long-term studies are not available because of the safety of inhaling flavors, and this becomes an association to effects of BO. Proliferation of granular tissue in bronchiolis epithelium, leading to fibrosis and scarring, causing partial or complete obstruction of the bronchi, as you can see in this picture above. Results in pulmonary function, decreased forced expiratory volume, decreased functional vital capacity, and obviously decreased FEV1 over FEVC. With severe enough, the loss of function can only be treated, as I said before, by lung transplant. And this becomes a problem with these people that don't realize that this is going to now be a problem with the e-cigarettes. It's a problem with cigarettes, but with e-cigarettes, it's now going to go ahead and become available. The symptoms start after only 2 to 8 weeks of exposure to these toxic fumes of respiratory signs of obstruction. In the absence of asthma, you get dry cough, shortness of breath, with or without symptom, without wheezing. The study of 7,049 adolescents without asthma found that the wheezing were high in individuals that used e-cigarettes. Again, the problem with this is that more studies need to be done, and I'm going to keep on saying that more studies need to be done to go ahead and find out how bad vaping is. Now, the first case was identified in 2000. It was identified as a microwave in flavoring production facility of popcorn. The lung dysfunction in this group reflected an occupational caused by inhalation of the butter flavoring agents, which contain diacetyl. Since then, the flavoring agents have been increasingly used in electronic cigarettes. Again, the FDA has not gone ahead and taken this off the market. What does a lung biopsy look like? Well, you get a fibroblastic proliferation of bronchial lumen, and you see that here's what you can see if you take a radiograph depiction of BO. Now, let's talk about electronic cigarettes, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Well, this is what the problem is. Still smoking tobacco cigarettes? Haven't you heard of e-cigarettes? This is how this is being promoted, and this is what is the problem now with e-cigarettes being promoted as in the press and in the newspaper ads, as well as on the radio and TV. There are more than 500 types of e-cigarettes for sale in the United States alone, making it difficult to characterize e-cigarettes as a single product. It must be said that the 500 types of e-cigarettes are given now to the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration in the United States, which is supposed to have had a ruling by September, as I said before, September 13th, 2021. But because there are so many types of e-cigarettes present, they have not been able to go ahead and excuse me, make a decision of what has to be done. Excuse me. The risk of vaping associated with lung injury is what the problem is right now. These global brands have a global sale in excess of $7 billion. The recent decline in smoking has accompanied the rapid growth of the use of alternate nicotine products among young people as well as young adults. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, they've all decided that they're going to stop smoking, and they're going to go ahead and take up e-cigarettes because it's quote-unquote better for them. Among adults who have never smoked cigarettes, young aged 18 to 24 were more likely than older adults to have tried e-cigarettes. Recently, 5%, almost 6% of American adults used electronic cigarettes, vapor products, on a regular basis. Excuse me. What are e-cigarettes? Well, you know that they have a source of power. They have an atomizer that generates heat, a housing body device, in a cartridge reserved for liquid juice, whatever the flavoring may be. They recharge. It lasts 1 to 3 days. The vapor inhaled to simulate smoke delivers the nicotine. The chamber heats a solution, vaporizing it. And as I said, now what's happened is they've gone ahead, and what they'll do is they'll increase the heat to go ahead and increases the vaporizing. Excuse me. Because e-cigarettes produce a vapor rather than smoke, it's commonly called vaping. The vaporization of liquid oil plant by having the certain temperature heats convert the contents of the cartridge into a nicotine vapor, an aerosolized mixture that is then inhaled by the person. And this is why e-cigarettes are so bad. What is the vapor? The vapor in a vaporized is in a gaseous form of any of the vaping materials. The e-liquids can range from a very small cigarette-like to a very, very powerful vapor. Less common is the waxy concentrates, but now the dry herbs mainly used for cannabis or marijuana, and mostly for recreational purposes as well as medicinal purposes. So what we have now are people using these e-cigarettes for medicinal purposes, and as we know that it is in many areas that it is legal for marijuana type products to be used. E-cigarettes is vaporized is commonly referred to as a vape pen due to its similar shape. And shaped to an average pen, a vape pen is twice as big as a Juul device. We'll see what a Juul device looks like very shortly. It's more difficult to charge. The bottom half of the vape pen must be plugged into a USB charger into the wall to be recharged. The battery can last longer than a Juul device, so that's why some people will go ahead and use the vape pen rather than the Juul. What is the vapor in a vaporized cartridges? It's a substance diffused or suspended in the air, which is originally liquid or solid, turned into a gaseous form. One cartridge holds 1.6 milliliters, which means there's a large variety of vaping materials available. Basic fruity flavors to some inventive flavors, such as that seen in candies. Excuse me. Excuse me. E-cigarettes are flavored with nicotine, and this is what we have to understand, because when these flavoring chemicals are heated, these vaporized are then inhaled, and that's what we find with these vaping problems with these cigarettes. Clinical studies about the safety of e-cigarettes have been submitted to the U.S. FDA, but they have not reacted on this at all. As I said, a release was due this month as to the chemicals they contain, the amount of nicotine in them, and whether their safety is good, bad, or indifferent. And so far, there's nothing been released yet. But then again, we have to think about the fact that there are 500 different types of e-cigarettes that have been submitted to the FDA. Parents' opinion of e-cigarettes use is a significant problem with negative parent opinion on e-cigarettes. But it must be said that while the parent is not the person who's going to go ahead and be really the person that really should rule on this is peers, such as individuals of their own age. That is why a lot of times you will see that medical students and other healthcare workers that are young will go ahead and talk about their opinion on e-cigarettes. And this is why this is very, very important, because we find that with the adults, the fact that the negative parent will go ahead and say no, but that the individual as their own age is a lot more important. Now, when are people likely to use e-cigarettes than cigarettes? Look at this. 8th grade, 3.6 to 9.5. In the 10th grade, 6.3 to 14%. In the 12th grade, 11.4 to 16.2%. And this happens to be 2 times as many boys use e-cigarettes as girls. And this is important, because what we have to do is we have to look at this and say, hey, what are we going to go ahead and do? Are we going to go ahead and have the person stop smoking cigarettes? Well, obviously, if you look at this here, the cigarettes versus e-cigarettes is way higher than cigarettes themselves. They are convenient. This sounds like a benefit, but actually is a serious problem. As more public places go smoke-free, smoking has become inconvenient, which motivated smokers to quit. But vaping continues to be popular, since it is being promoted as being safe, and this becomes a very, very big problem that we can see. Most commonly used form of tobacco among teens in the U.S. largely believed due to advertising, flavoring, and belief that they are safer alternative to cigarettes. Again, look at the ads. Look what we see here. Make the healthier route. Take back your freedom. Risk of early adaptation. E-cigarettes user serves as an introductory problem for preteens and teens who go on to use other tobacco products, including cigarettes, which are known to cause disease and premature death. We certainly see people walking around with oxygen tanks and people who have COPD. But unfortunately, we can't go ahead and tell these people about the early adoption of stopping to smoke. High school students who used e-cigarettes in about a month were about 7 times more likely to report smoking cigarettes when asked approximately 6 months later, compared to students who said they didn't use e-cigarettes. This results suggest that teens using e-cigarettes are at greater risk for smoking cigarettes in the future, and we all know what the detrimental effect of smoking has caused COPD and actually caused death. Health specifics to teens: development of brain circuits that control attention and learning, increased risk of mood disorders and permanent problems with impulse control. Young adults using nicotine products in any form are uniquely at risk for long-lasting effects, as nicotine affects the development of the brain's reward system. Problem: continued e-cigarette use can make other drugs such as cocaine and methamphetamine more pleasurable to a teen's developing brain, and we will go ahead and see in the future that these people will go ahead and start using other drugs, and this becomes a problem, from e-cigarettes to cocaine. One study of high school students found 1/4 reported using e-cigarettes for dripping, a practice which people produce an inhaled vaporizing by placing e-liquids drops directly onto atomizer coils. Remember, we talked about how bad this is, and especially when we go ahead and it will create a thicker vapor, improves flavors, produces a stronger throat hit. And again, research is really needed on the risk of this practice. Freebase nicotine is nicotine in its purest form, more potent when heated, and it can cause absorbed mucus in your lungs and brain. Freebase nicotine is nicotine with added ammonium diacetyl phosphate, which makes the nicotine stronger and more bioavailable. Freebasing is associated with cocaine addiction, which means that freebase nicotine will result in freebase cocaine addiction. Are they a healthier alternative to cigarettes? Well, they're less lethal, that's what people keep saying, than conventional cigarettes. But when people who regularly smoke switch to them as a complete replacement, but they are not healthy, despite what everybody says. Exposes the lungs to a variety of chemicals, those added to e-liquids and other chemicals produced during the heating process. The vapor contains known carcinogens, toxic chemicals, potentially toxic metal nanoparticles from the device itself. We talked about nickel and chromium, and cadmium. These toxic metal also found in e-cigarette smokers that can cause breathing problems and disease. So, are e-cigarettes better? The answer is no. Do they help you quit? Well, studies about e-cigarettes and smoking behavior show conflicting results. E-cigarettes were mildly helpful in kicking the habit in a clinical trial. But in other studies, e-cigarettes did not increase quit rates or was even associated with a higher risk of continuing to smoke. But another recent review concluded that real-world use of e-cigarettes are associated with lower quit rates of smoking. I don't believe that this is true, but again, more research has to be done on this. E-cigarettes, approximately 4 million youth are seen. 27% of high school students admitted using e-cigarettes. 10% of middle school students admitted using e-cigarettes. Does vaping include nicotine? The answer is yes. 1 teaspoon of a 12 milligram e-liquid equivalent to 60 cigarettes. Vaping contains freebase nicotine instead of nicotine salts. Vaping appeals to kids and teenagers, especially since it comes in flavors. We talked about this before. It comes in flavors such as bubblegum, cola, chocolate, apple crumb, cola, and others. There's almost 6,000 different flavors that can be seen and in these different e-cigarettes. Some teens would not even try regular cigarettes, but they will be tempted by e-cigarettes because of these flavors. The sensation of holding an e-cigarette satisfies cravings of some smokers more than nicotine replacement products do. So a lot of people that use e-cigarettes find out that, well, this is just as well, because I now can go ahead and hold this in my hand. Now, Secondhand Smoke. This is a small study by Wolfgang Schaber of the Bavarian Health and Food Safety Authority and his colleagues published in the Internal Journal of Hygiene and Environmental Health in December, found that vaping worsened indoor air quality, specifically by increasing the concentration of nicotine, particular product, aluminum, and other compounds have been linked to lung and cardiovascular disease and cancer. So there are some studies being done showing that the problems with e-cigarettes and secondhand smoke. But again, we keep talking about the fact that we have to go ahead and remember that e-cigarettes contain more nicotine because one pod equals 20 cigarettes. As of December 2019, the eval is associated with over 2,300 hospital admissions and 79 deaths in the United States alone. This is in 2019. We are now in 2021. We don't have the statistics yet, but I can assure you that it's going to be more than this is. First of all, there's a problem. Reported use of 27.5 school students using this, and approximately 80,000 cigarette smokers. So which is better, the 27.5 school students that are using e-cigarettes, or the approximately 10.5 students using cigarettes themselves? The e-cigarettes contain over 7,000 flavor chemicals, which we said, and again, 15,000 different flavors, which are mint flavors, are probably the most favored. The FDA says that they plan to ban most flavors, and probably only will come out with tobacco and menthol, but we haven't seen anything yet. And as I said, they're supposed to report this last week. The people just still get them now through illegal pathways. So this becomes another problem. What happens with some of these flavors have already been banned. But what happens is these people get them through illegal pathways. So what happens is that these people get hospitalized. When they get hospitalized, because of COVID right now, they are immediately thought that they have COVID and find out that they don't, and they don't go ahead and really give you a good history. So when you have e-cigarettes compromised effectiveness of the ban, this is what the problem is. And this is found really through illegal pathways, especially in New York City, where they were selling the black, the illegal pathways were being seen that they were selling this all the time. Now, vape. The starter kit is a vape pen, is only about $25. Remember we said it uses a USB charger. Everybody has one of these, but it contains 40 milliliters of juice. Now, let's compare the vape pen to the Juul. Well, the vape is a larger unit, longer battery life, contains nicotine. Again, the other one contains nicotine. The Juul is a smaller unit, a shorter battery life. Freebase Nicotine, nicotine salts with a Juul. Less expensive to use the vaping e-cigarettes versus the more expensive Juul, and they're both addictive, despite what anybody says. The Juul is an electronic device that heats up a cartridge containing oils to create a vapor, which quickly dissolves into the air. It has a battery, which is the power source. It has a housing unit body, and it stores vaping material. Usually, if you look at it, it looks like a flash drive, as you can see here. For its similar sleek and compact size. It's half the size of an average vape pen, and it's simple to charge. Juul again connects to a USB drive and can be simply plugged into a computer. The battery life, as I said, does not last as longer as an e-cigarette. 1 Juul pod contains glycerol, propylene, benzoic acid, natural oils, and again, nicotine, which between 40 to 50 milligrams is exactly equivalent to 20 cigarettes. Again, let's look at the price of a Juul. Here we see the e-cigarette USB charger with 4 replacement pods. If we look at it very carefully, here's what they look like. And yes, they do look very, very similar to a finger drive or a what some would call just a regular plug-in type thing. Remember that I told you with vaping, we now find the emergency room visits become a lot better, a lot more frequently rather, not a lot better, and that what happens is that these people do not go ahead and give a good history. We have found that many of the times we have gone ahead and asked the person, do you use this? Oh, just occasionally. Well, occasionally means regularly. Vaping is a billion-dollar industry in the U.S. The FDA is given authority to oversee vaping in 2019, but the industry remains largely unregulated. Many patients use e-cigarettes. As we can see, the mechanism of vaping-induced lung injury not confirmed yet. The ADA, as we said, has not gone ahead and done anything. Electronic cigarettes, vaping-associated lung disease is been now looked at and looked at. It leads to cigarette and vape-associated lung injury. Confirmed cases are 1,299 from 49 states. Confirmed death, as I said, are 26 from 27 states. And average demographic results are 70% male, and the median age is only 18 years old. What else is at high risk is groups of elderly patients, pregnant patients, and previous history of lung disease. What is a summary of what we know? 2,000 documented cases of popcorn flavoring exposure was seen first in 20,000. First commercial release of e-cigarettes in China was in 2003. The United States commercial release of e-cigarettes was in 2006. The FDA started regulating e-cigarettes, or said they were going to start regulating in e-cigarettes, and the FDA plans to ban all fruit and mint flavors, but they haven't done it yet. What do we know? Greater FDA regulation, long-term study of e-cigarettes and association with BO, effect of flavor bans on e-cigarettes is really what we have to see and what we have to do, and what our summary is. The teen vaping summary: the Center of Disease and Control and Prevention has more than 3,000 cases, including deaths of e-cigarettes and vaping products, with associated lung injuries. These included patients at the age of 35. In 2 years, high school students went from 11.7 to approximately triple this rate. Medical students, middle school students tripled from 3.3% to 10.5%. Again, ambassadors are best advised by peers rather than older persons. There is general agreement among scientists that e-cigarettes are certainly less harmful than cigarettes themselves. But is this really true? Because we know that cigarettes contain 7,000 chemicals. What do e-cigarettes contain? Well, we showed you that they contain 10 of the most important products that cigarettes do. Vaping still has nicotine, which is a potential harmful and highly addictive drug that increases the risk of a range of health and development issues, especially among teens and pregnant women. These are not broadly regulated tests that show that e-cigarettes have dangerous chemicals, but we know that they do include cancerous chemicals, and this is true. Vaping is convenient. It sounds like a benefit, but actually it is a serious problem. As more public places go smoke-free, vaping is becoming more popular, and the popularity is being promoted as being safe. Again, I thank thee for everyone that has allowed me to deliver this presentation, and here are the references as such. If anybody has any questions, they can contact me at alanf@temple.edu. Thank you very much.